Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Us, a show dedicated to bringing real help to real couples. I'm your host, Melanie Studley.
What's up, guys? My name is Seth Studley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and together we are high-performance marriage coaches.
We are cutting through the bullcrap and creating a movement of happy, healthy, badass couples all over the world.
Let's go! All right, what's up, guys? Hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Seth Studley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, along with my beautiful wife, Melanie, who is a high-performance marriage coach. And today we're taking a little bit of a turn to different stuff, but this is going to be a fascinating conversation. And today we have Rafe Kelley. What's up, my man? How's it going?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good.
We're
good.
awesome.
So Melanie heard you on Jordan Peterson's podcast and was just, like, oh my gosh, we got to talk to this guy. And then we found out, of course, you're just a little north of us. We're down in Maple Valley in Washington.
Just south of Seattle. Yeah.
So
Nice.
you're not too far from us. So we know the Northwest Woods and the creeks and rivers very, very well. And but would you please introduce yourself to our audience for people who may have not heard about you, how you got into this, and what do you exactly do?
It's a good question. So I teach a ecology of practices, one could call it, that incorporates aspects of parkour, sort of structural and somatic physical practices, nature connection practices, playing with objects, and a lot of interactive games coming from contact improvisation, capoeira, and martial arts. And also integrated into that is aspects of dialoguing, storytelling, and ritual. So I started parkour teaching 17 years ago. And before that, I was a gymnastics coach, and I've been practicing martial arts since I was 6 years old. And then via those things and experiencing the transformation that I got from those practices and the need that I had for nature, I started to see that there was something bigger and more holistic that I wanted to aim at.
Mm-hmm.
And through the ideas of natural movement and Georges Hebert, started incorporating the martial arts into my parkour. I started incorporating time in nature. Through students of mine who came from the Wilderness Awareness School in Duvall, we started getting into the wilderness skills and some of the cultural aspects that come from the wilderness skills tradition. And then through encountering Jordan Peterson's work, and then later John Vervaeke's work, I started to really develop a sort of cognitive science psychological map of what meaning is and why these practices are particularly powerful in helping people attain meaning in life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm currently at.
Yeah, that's so cool. I want to highlight what you literally just said without, you kind of didn't say it, but you sort of said it. It helps people attain meaning in life, like movement, being in nature, it's just so counter. I know there are subcultures that talk about this stuff all the time and that's all they do. But the typical Western person would be like, oh, it's money. It's your car. How big's your house? What's your, it's all of those things that have the meaningful side of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I love what you said. It's really hard for me not to say 1,000 questions all at once. I have a whole list for you here.
Well, what I would like to talk about, which, so a lot of what I've heard from you and your practice and what you do with parkour and integrating all this stuff, a lot of this is kind of second nature to me. I grew up in South Carolina, up in the backwoods. In fact, the area I grew up in was called the Dark Corner, right? Back in the holler and the Appalachians and stuff. And we're always in the woods, in the creeks, running around, climbing trees, all this stuff. And then, move out to Seattle. Obviously, it's a little bit different vibe. Same, proximity to nature and stuff like that. But people kind of eschew nature, and especially in young boys, which I know that you talk a lot about. We have two boys, 15 and 14, and then a little daughter who's 11. And I try to incorporate this stuff in everything I can with the kids. You talk a lot about rough and tumble play and being out in the woods and just doing stuff, kind of like free range kind of thing, which I love because I learned a lot from that and have a lot of meaning from that, making meaning from that because I experienced that. And we try to impart as much as we can with kids. But if you could talk a little bit about, I want to go a couple different ways with this, like being a licensed marriage and family therapist. One, I want to have a conversation. How can this be good for couples? How can this be good for people's relationships, which I think it has huge implications? And then speak to the parenting piece a little bit. And we can make a lot of people mad by talking about, the 7-minute recess up in Mercer Island and those goofballs and stuff like that.
I couldn't believe that.
But give us some advice on what parents should do. And if we're not comfortable with being in the woods.
You're asking like 18 questions.
I know. I'm sorry.
I'll
bring it.
I think I've got a place to go.
Okay.
Let me run with it. First of all, I think it's interesting because, in that conversation with Peterson, I talked about the mentor that I had growing up. Mm-hmm. He was from backwoods Appalachia as well.
Nice.
He was from the corner of Virginia, right next to North Carolina and West Virginia.
Okay.
And I got to spend some time with his grandfather, and his grandfather had 4 brothers. Whoa. And those 4 brothers, their father was the traveling pastor and doctor for that region. And so he taught them like medicine, and he taught them obviously the Bible and all the biblical stories and how to preach the word of God. And and they would then all go into fight in World War II, all come back and form a bluegrass band and travel the country playing bluegrass.
Be still my heart. I love bluegrass so much. Yeah. It's ridiculous. That's amazing.
So I talk a lot about the idea of creating a self-worth esteeming, right? That as a culture, we fall into this idea of self-esteem. You're just supposed to love yourself however you are. And you do need love. You do need to love yourself, but that doesn't mean that you have to accept yourself. You have to also have some sort of aspiration. Mm-hmm. Aspiration actually gives meaning and optimism to life. And one of the things that people are suffering from is when you say, oh, I love myself as I am, I love myself as I am, but actually you don't have any developed capacities. It creates insecurity. Mm-hmm. It creates narcissism. And so I've thought about this idea that what we're missing is so often ways in which we are actually valuable to ourselves and to other people. And I think about those guys as exemplars of like a truly deep cultural elderhood, right? Mm-hmm. Every one of those guys. So that when I went to visit him when I was 8 years old, we were driving through the backwoods of Appalachia. We come through the town Staffordsville, which is named after that family. Mm-hmm. So we arrive at Haynes Stafford's house, which is a log-built house that they built by hand. And they bring, a hog. We eat ham from a hog that was raised and slaughtered and cured.
Oh, yeah. By
the family. Trout that was caught by the family. Deer that was caught by the family. Making fry bread there. One of his aunts took me out and we harvested sarsaparilla root and made sarsaparilla tea.
Yeah. My brother does that. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, Haynes got up and spoke extemporaneously from the Bible for a long time before we sat down and ate. And then, they all got out their instruments and played music at the end. Mm. And so you think about people are suffering because they actually they're not capable of anything. Like these old guys, every one of them could build their own house, raise their own food, hunt, fish, play music, mm-hmm. knew the Bible front to back, right? Could medicine using food, using plants from the earth, could set a bone, could fight, right?
Yeah.
That's a source of self-esteem. Right. And unfortunately, that family suffered what a lot of families in Appalachia suffered. That cultural system has broken down. Mm-hmm. And as it broke down, drugs and, abuse, systems of abuse, trauma, all is coming into that system. Mm-hmm. So you can really see how culture holds people up. And so I've said, we're trapped in this Cartesian idea that because we are because we can think, mm-hmm. cogito ergo sum, right? But actually it's really fundamentally long before we could think, we move.
Right.
We move. It's our capacity for movement and the fact that we are what in the scientific literature it's called autopoietic. Autopoietic systems are systems that search for the conditions that allow them to self-organize. Mm. And so they avoid hazards and seek out benefits. Mm-hmm. That's the center of what we are. And we've forgotten so many of these deeper layers of what we are. And we've been stuck in this idea of, it's just how much you can earn. That's the only thing that matters.
Right.
But when you look at an older cultural system like that, you have the capacity to be valuable to your community because you're a song leader, because you're because you have medicine, because you have the best religious understanding,
Mm-hmm.
because you're the best hunter, the best fisher, right? Because you're good at putting a house together, right? And all those skills have been professionalized and lost to us. So we don't grow our own food anymore. Big agribusiness does that. We don't cook our own food anymore. We rely on restaurants to do that, or grocery stores. We don't play anymore. We use video games to play.
Yeah,
we don't even have sex anymore. Like, this is what's so crazy, is that as pornography has exploded, the rate at which people actually engage in in sexual relationships, even within their established relationship, is dropping off a cliff. We have literally given the very act that binds us together as couples and that brings new human beings into the world to a professional class. And we just view it as a commodity that we consume on screen.
It just makes me want to say like 1,000 things. And even out where we live. So we live in King County. King County is a tough place to live because you can't do things like have a fire over a certain size. You can't go out and build the house you want to build. Like, we would get in trouble by the county that we live in if we wanted to build a cob house or a whatever, anything, right? I want to build a greenhouse over my house and have food that I grow all year. We could never do that out here unless we were multimillionaires, right? So even the societal structure that we're living in is stopping that process from happening. We're not allowed to do some of these things, which I just find absolutely disgusting. And it makes me so irritated. But I wanted to talk about the video game thing because that is huge. And all of this, for me, when I heard your podcast with Jordan Peterson, I immediately thought of my own childhood. I grew up out here, like outside of Seattle, right? And I did all of the arts. So I did not do anything athletic. I always wanted to snowboard. I always wanted to skateboard. I always wanted to do, I think the most athletic thing I ever did was rollerblade. But I was always told no because I was doing arts and I was doing theater. And what if you break your leg and blah, blah, blah. And so I sort of missed out on, I don't say sort of, I actually feel like I missed out on like real play. Like, and now as an adult, as I heard your episode, I was like, oh my gosh, that it feels like it's connecting so many dots. Like, I remember when we were first dating or married, and do you remember we wrestled and you kicked me and I cried because he didn't kick me hard. It's not like he hurt me, but I didn't know how to manage my own body because I had been told from my parents, like, well, don't do that. You'll get hurt. So then in that, I realized I have a huge aversion to pain. I'm afraid to rough and tumble play because what if I get hurt? I'll probably just die if I get hurt, right? And it's ridiculous. And so then I'm like watching your videos on your website, which just look amazing, and like people playing and adults are playing, and it's so very apparent to me how much I want that. But it's like I have to have someone teach me because I didn't actually learn it. And then also that sort of this layer of, well, I can play a video game, so I don't need to learn how to go. I can play Excite Bike. So I don't need to really learn how to do a mountain biking because I can beat it on whatever. Right. So I would love to know, you've talked a lot about how video games impact this they trick our mind into thinking we're capable of doing something or that we are playing, or, like Zelda, you're running and jumping and you're flying, but in the real world, you're sitting the whole time. Love to just hear you riff on that for a while.
Yeah. So this is one of the most controversial things that I talk about, which is that I really think that people shouldn't play video games. In general, I'm not saying there's no use case for them, but I think that we've treated this as like totally, like people who play video games are highly attached to video games. Gamer identities are really big. They've been attacked a lot in ways that weren't rational. It's like, oh, you guys are all going to become school shooters because of video games. And that's not true. So they're very defensive about pointing out the potential costs. But the way that I look at video games is just that they have an enormous opportunity cost because they fire all the kind of excitement circuitry that you get around intense physical play. But they don't have any of the physical benefits. They don't have an embodied procedural output that's outside of interacting with the digital space. So, my older brother, it was a pro paintball player for a while, right? So, paintball's a game, right? He doesn't, he's not necessarily super skilled with real firearms, but the transfer from the skills that he has from paintball to actually hunting is going to be massively closer than someone who's only getting from video games.
Absolutely.
Not to mention the fact that he's getting real fitness, real interaction, real, his body's getting strong, hitting the ground, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So you're missing all the nutrition, basically, or the majority of the physical nutrition that play allows.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's far less self-governing, right? When you physically play, you get fatigued. So you stop and then you have to choose other activities. But if you're getting that same hyper, flow experience via video game, you don't have to stop, which means that it can really easily outcompete everything else. So, the last video game that I played was Skyrim. So it's not like I've never played video games. I guess I was for a time what you might call like a casual hardcore video game player. Mostly didn't play video games, didn't like video games, but when I played one, I would get really, really into it. So the last one that I played was Skyrim, which is, extremely well-known video game. Steam had it tracked the hours that I played. And by the time that I was done with that game, I had played 230 hours. And that was over the course of probably 3 months, 4 months.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, like, what could I have done with that time? Right.
Yeah.
And not only that, it was like, I would start playing at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. And I wouldn't really be having fun until 10:30, like getting into the quest, figuring out what I was doing, which meant that I was really wanting to stay up until 1:30, 2 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Which meant that when I woke up in the morning, I was groggy and I wasn't present with my wife to the same degree. And then when it's time to like meet with her at the end of the day, I'm already thinking like, what am I going to do on my next quest?
Right.
So that's those things, the way it competes for your attention and pulls them away from things that are much more fundamentally important, and how it can trigger this flow experience that has very little actual connection to real life skill, in a way that doesn't have any self-governing capacity. So like if I decided to go do parkour at 9 o'clock at night, like my body's going to tell me I need to stop.
Yeah.
But I don't get the same signals that I need to slow down and stop when I'm in a video game, that's the same exact mechanism that keeps you eating sugar, right? Fatty, sugary substances past the point where your body is actually satiated. Like the whole, it's an incentive problem within the capitalist system, which is that if you can find something that takes like a basic reward pathway, and you can create a hyper-stimulating thing that's very easy to deliver and very easy to overconsume, then people will spend a lot of money for it.
Right.
But it's generally not healthy for them or for their community.
Right. Well, nothing is like nothing in that category would be healthy long term because it's a substitute. It is not real. It is a facade. And also, when you're talking about video games, it oftentimes makes kids think that they are good at something, like in the real world, and they go try it, and they either fall or some kid makes fun of them or something, and then they go, "Oh yeah, see, I wasn't good at it," and then they don't try it anymore. And how? I mean,
Well, it makes me think about what's the game that the kids? What is that? Fortnite. Like you can, I don't know if you've ever played Fortnite or watched someone play Fortnite. They can literally build while they're like running up air. They're running up in the air and they're putting like pallets down at the same time and they're carrying a gun. Yeah. And I'm like, what is this putting into our kids' minds that they think that that's possible? So then they go outside and they look at a stick and they're like, ugh, I can't put a pallet up here,
Yeah, you have this hyper stimulating idea, right? Like, if you consume a lot of pornography, you will see your partner's body differently than if you stop consuming pornography. I've gone through that cycle, right? Where I'm like, I'm not going to look at pornography. It's like, wow, she's really beautiful.
Right.
Right. Like, I'm not, because all the salient signals of fertility and beauty and youth can be, they can find, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, whatever beautiful young woman, but then they can manipulate the imagery to make it even more hyperstimulating. Right now, there's all this AI pornography that's starting to be generated. It's like, what does AI pornography look like? It looks exaggerated to the point where like no human woman could possibly look that way.
Which is, then you think of that, someone was talking recently about, what is it called? The Oculus. You put headphones on. AR. Pornography mixed into that, and it's just ridiculous. Like it, and I want to go back to like, you talked about how this impacts, how the relationship is impacted when we don't have like rough and tumble play and all of those things growing up. And you mentioned like the rat study where rats don't, and you talked about the idea too of like, when we don't allow kids to play, they are missing we, as adults, we only go, okay, you're fighting or you're trying to have sex. And there's like no middle ground. Talk about that for a little bit. Cause I think it's so incredibly valuable for people to understand that.
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to talk about that. I kind of want to go back to a question that Seth asked to start with, because I wanted to lay this out, which is the meaning in life piece, right? And I think I can connect it back to that. But what I've discovered through that is that the cognitive science and psychology on this is really clear. Your experience of meaning in life, not the meaning of life, but meaning in life, has to do with how connected you feel. So how connected you are into community, like friendships are huge. Like how well you know your barista, it turns out, is like a big predictor of how happy you are. But through our retreats, what we've kind of like honed down to is there's 5 fundamental connections that every individual has to reality that are fundamental to the experience of meaning in life. And I think that these tie into the question, Seth, that you had about how does that then show up in your marriage, and how does that show up in how you work with kids. So the first connections is, what are the internal aspects of the self? So you could say, well, how well does your lat coordinate with your glute? And that's one relationship. But also your movement is inherently emotional. Like when a baby is sad, they don't just feel sad, they cry, right? Emotion is inherently motoric at its root. And I believe, and I haven't gone and like looked deeply at the scientific research on this, but what I suspect is the case is that you just learn to inhibit the motor expression of emotion, but it's still the motor nerves that are telling you what you feel as you, it's the motor areas of the brain that are telling you what you feel as you scale up. So babies don't feel sad. They cry. They don't feel angry. Their fists bunch up and their face bunches up, right? So, Jordan Peterson, in the beginning of his book, he says, in his book, and it was one of his lectures, he talks about the idea that that emotion is downstream of action potentials. It tells you how you should act in the world. And as we begin to experience emotions, they're not actually separated. It's only later that we learn to inhibit the physical expression of the emotion so that you can feel something without actually beginning to act it out in the world. So as soon as we're starting to investigate the internal relationships, there's also that emotional layer. And even when you thinking is literally mostly just mapping out potential motor pathways. You have an avatar essentially that you're doing, which is like imagining what it would feel like to jump and not doing it, but you're firing those motor nerves. When you have an internal narrative, what I suspect is the case is that you're sub-vocalizing. You're talking to yourself. But talking doesn't even occur until quite late in development, right? You're starting to be a cognitive agent in the world just based on your capacity to see, which is a physically active process, and your ability to move, right? So you create imagery based off of the physical sensation of moving, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting the world. So the internal relationship with the self, how well integrated are those? How well do you communicate between the love that you have for your partner and your self-defensiveness around advocating for yourself? That can be a really difficult thing to integrate. So you have to integrate that. Then there's how well do you integrate with the physical environment as a space to locomote through? How well connected are you? How much can you see about the world? Then there's how can you connect to the things that we can manipulate and change and work with in our world? Then there's how do you interact with other body minds? The last is the transcendent. How do you interrelate to the collective intelligences, like all the birds in the forest that kind of tell you something that one bird can't, or, all the ants in the ant colony, or Google, right? These are collective intelligence that exists above the level of us as agents. So you need a system that takes you through those. So when you're looking at how you manage a partnership or how you manage children, you can also be asking, how am I facilitating my partner and my child experiencing life more deeply and with more connection through all of those things? How are we together as a family, as a partnership, building this capacity? Like I say, the ultimate purpose of the practice is to fall more deeply in love with reality. And if you can facilitate that with your partnership, you're going to fall more deeply in love with each other, which that's the purpose of marriage, I would say.
Oh, that's good. I was thinking, so we talk often about approaching healing, growth, etc., mental health through bio, psychosocial, spiritual lens, right? And of course, we know that there is a mind and body connection. And when we engage one without engaging the other, it's almost like we're getting like a C grade on what we could have gotten an A grade on. Does that make sense? Like I can go, and have you ever heard of Dr. Amy Cuddy? She had a TED Talk, and her work.
Power poses.
Yeah, she's a Harvard trained psychologist, and she does the power poses, right? And she talks about, the way that you position your body, right? So we have the physical, the mind-body connection. You position your body, and then your mind will follow up. So in a power pose, it can be like a Superman pose or a Wonder Woman pose for women or whatnot. And when you embody that, it immediately, and there's all kinds of scientific research about this, it immediately changes your brain chemistry. It increases your confidence. It increases your, what does it increase? It increases your ability to trust yourself when you're about to do something scary or nerve-wracking or whatnot. And I've done it before. Like we speak and stuff, and I've done a lot of speaking engagements. And I promise you, I'll go into the bathroom and do a power pose, and then I'll be like, yes, let's go. And then I crush the presentation, which is really funny, but it actually works. So it's engaging that mind-body piece. So what I'm, as a therapist, I'm thinking, okay, how can this have more implications in marriage? Go ahead.
I want to say so many things. It makes me think of this thing that we see. So we do coaching, right? So we coach couples. And one of the things that I see that I've never known how to place this in my mind until I listened to your episode. And not that it's, I don't know, you'll get what I'm saying in a second here, but we see this sort of uptick of men who want to work on themselves. So they begin to do things like the 75 hard, or they start rucking outside in the rain every day, or they do some sort of physical exercise. And it means a lot to them. And their wives will be like, oh, he's doing that stupid thing again. They'll like downplay the importance of this physical activity because it's something that they are not socialized to do. Women, we don't ruck in the rain. I mean, you can, of course, but I want to sort of talk about that dynamic in like the dynamic of movement and play and physicality to a human. And then that, the input that gives them, and then the input that brings into the relationship. And specifically for how women, like, because you talked about at your retreats that women have the most profound responses because they typically don't have any interaction physically with men that is not sexual. So I know that was like a lot of things to say. I don't even know, but I want your thoughts on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I want to go back. I definitely am interested in Seth in the line that you were talking about there, but I wanted to go back to what you said earlier, Melanie, and I think it's connected to what you're saying here about physicality in relationship, research that I mentioned about the rats. So I have to say first, I got the model organism wrong. It's not the research on the so they did research actually on mink, not rats.
Oh, okay.
They looked at rough and tumble play and sexual competence in both males and females. And the way they measured that was, for males, it was how confident they were to basically initiate the sexual thing, which was to mount the females. For females, it was actually their ability to push the males off and say that they didn't want it. So, but they found that rough and tumble play predicted both. The males were more willing to initiate sexual encounters when they had more rough and tumble experience, and females were more able to resist the males.
Mm.
So it benefits both from like
Yeah.
an unwanted encounter for a female. It's like, no, I'm not ready. Get the heck off. And then for a male, it's like, oh, I can propagate the species better if I rough and tumble play. And not to like make fun of the scientific piece of it, but it's like, oh yeah, you've already been physical with other stuff. Now you know what to do when
Right.
you
Right.
that is very basic, and that makes a lot of sense to me. That's interesting.
Yeah. So we've talked about this at our retreats. Like, do you want to have a partner who has a lot of sensitivity to levels of touch? Right. Like, you can imagine that sometimes you're in an encounter with your partner, a sexual encounter, and you're craving like very light touch that day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Sometimes you're craving really intense touch. Like, I want you to scratch me to the point where it's almost hurting. I want you to grab and hold me really, really tight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you have a partner who is very literate in touch, they're going to be able to scale that difference better, right? My youngest daughter likes to be really intensely touched. Like, she wants. Have you ever had your psoas massaged?
No, but I've stretched it before. Like, I've done psoas stretches.
Absolutely brutal. To have someone dig into your psoas, it's one of the worst like sports massage things you'll ever experience. So Katie is massage me, and so I'm squeezing her legs, and I'm kind of just teasing her because I don't necessarily want to be massaging her, and she's always asking to be massaged, right? So I start digging into her psoas to be like, hey, maybe you don't want me to keep massaging you. And she just starts giggling. She thinks it's hilarious, right? And then like when you scratch her back, she wants you to scratch her at the point where you're like, you're worried that her skin's going to break. That's what she craves. But think about it this way, like, your sensitivity allows you to get to that edge that's comfortable without potentially getting over that edge and hurting her. And how do you develop that sensitivity? You have to calibrate it through touch. So people who don't touch are not well calibrated. But then the other thing that you're calibrating is the response, right? So we talk a lot about consent, but then beyond consent, attunement, right? So when we do any kind of rough and tumble work, we always remind the students that they have ownership over the level of intensity at which they're playing. So at any time that they feel like the game is too intense, the way that the other player is playing is too intense, the place that they got touched is not comfortable for them, they always have the right, the responsibility, actually, to be clear about that and to be truthful about that. Not supposed to suppress it. So that's the consent thing. But that consent is like basic, but beyond consent is attunement, which is that you need to develop your inner sensitivity so that you're actually recognizing what's happening. I want to play with you such that it's the most mutually beneficial experience that we can have, right? And that comes from, I can, maybe I can like calibrate the level of pressure to whatever you ask me for. Then I can also see how you respond, right? And am I better at picking up your signals that this is the level that you're engaging in, right? So this could be, you can think about this in a sexual experience. You can think about it in massage, right? You have a massage therapist, they're starting to bear down into your quad. And are they picking up your signal that your nervous system is ready for that level of pressure?
Right.
And they're able to find that exact right point that's just enough and not too much. Right?
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, right?
Exactly.
It's a feedback loop.
And you need to run those feedback loops more in order to develop greater physical sensitivity to each other. And children are inherently highly driven to do this kind of rough and tumble play. The problem that we have now is that in a traditional culture, you actually have lots of children, right? So the average adult has multiple children, not one, and they're not waiting until they're 30 to have that child. So there's lots of children around. And then the children don't go to school where they're age graded, right? Once they're no longer spending the majority of their time with their mother, they go into the play group, right? And then they reach puberty and they start going and taking on functional tasks and being part of it. But from 3 years old, 4 years old to 10, 11, 12 years old, they're basically with other kids most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids pass on the culture of play. Kids' cultures of play are really fascinating. Like, Ring Around the Rosie, Pocket Full of Posy. That's the Black Death.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. That comes from the 14th century. That's when that rhyme started being passed down.
That's crazy.
So these games that kids play, they'll be retained. And then the older kids in a cohort, they police the younger kids in the cohort to make sure that they're regulating well. And when adults don't impose play on children play to sustain the game and the love of fun, not primarily to win.
Yeah.
And so that's how they've developed extremely good regulation. But if you take a kid who's never been allowed to roughhouse, but he's highly driven to roughhouse, and is 7 years old, and you put him with another kid, like, they'll very easily overstimulate each other, end up having negative interactions. And so it's not as simple as we can just say, okay, now all the kids get to play again. We actually have to build a culture of play that recognizes the underlying things and the differences between highly functional play cultures and how a play culture can actually break down and become dysfunctional.
It totally makes me think, and I just sort of, again, I'm using myself as the example here because I did not grow up roughhousing, but my brothers did. And what I'm seeing now, and I would love to know if there's studies about this, is that it seems to me like girls and young women who grew up with more rough and tumble play are probably much better integrated as adults, like in all arenas. Because our youngest kid is a girl. She's 11. She sounds exactly like your daughter. She hugs you and she like smashes your face into hers. Like everything is like how I would touch times 100. And but she already, because Seth will roughhouse with her just like he does with our boys. Like it's not any different because she wants to be roughhoused in that way as well. But it's interesting to me because now I'm seeing the relationship with our clients who were clearly, it's very apparent now, they were probably never roughhoused as little girls. And they struggle just to be in any kind of physical contact with their husband. There tends to be this bigger and bigger and broadening gap as their marriage goes along because they don't even have the sort of integrative skill sets that rough and tumble and just play in general, but specifically that they would have had they played more. It just really is like kind of blowing my mind because that creates so many marital problems. And then back to the idea of like, if their husband has this wake up moment, he starts going to the gym all the time. She's never had that aha, move my body moment ever. So now this dissonance, she degrades what he's doing and makes fun of it or whatever, but she still is not moving, not doing anything. Again, that seems like culturally okay for women, but I genuinely don't think it is. I don't know. It's just fascinating really blowing my mind.
I love this idea, not only with, kind of acculturation of roughhousing with kids, obviously starting them at a young age. And it is the most natural, innate thing possible that we can do, in my belief, right? Want the cure, look to nature, look inside yourself, and to God. But the implications that this could have for intimacy and connection with a couple, right? So we could talk all day about kids and get them dirty, let them, which is hilarious because like our daughter, I let her build a fire outside. She was going to cook bacon. I'm like, yeah, go for it. And I give her some matches. Of course, I've taught her that stuff before through camping and stuff like that. So her building a fire, which is so cute. She like got rocks and everything. And I come outside, it's like a, 8-inch flame on the thing. I'm like,
she got her pan on it. It was very cute.
So we could talk all day about the implications of how that impacts kids, their level of attention span, biopsychosocial, spiritual, all day long. But what is cool, what I'm kind of putting together is, physical, non-sexual, random play and roughhousing to get emotionally and physically closer to your spouse, right? And I was thinking, again, in this, I'm like, I wonder, the 5 love languages, right? And that's, again, not the end all be all, but it's a good kind of, it's good wisdom. It's good information. So I wonder if folks who most of our clients, male clients, are physical touch. That's a big piece, right? I wonder if there's a correlation between a physical touch love language correlating to how much they roughhoused and wrestled when they were younger, of like, oh, this is engaging. This, touch and messing around engages all of my senses. I wrestled for 4 years in high school. And like I said, just in the woods all the time and still very, very active today. And I'm wondering if there's just a correlation between that. Again, my mind is...
I mean, in my mind, from a wife perspective, from a family that doesn't touch and a family that actually sort of shames you for touching or thinking that it's important, which is weird.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that so in my mind, okay, this is going to get real weird. Just hang out with me for a minute. So in my mind, what I want to have happen is that we can play like buddies, like chums, like it's this and we're just hanging and it's fine. And it will never turn into something sexual unless I want it to.
Right.
But what it feels like is if I get chummy with you, it'll instantly turn into something sexual. And that isn't what I wanted. So I would rather be safe and not be chummy. And so I'll build that wall, but that's really not what I want.
So there could be a whole host, if there's not already, of like therapeutic interventions around that, of like, hey, this is non-sexual.
That's literally why I reached out to you. I was like, do you do marriage retreats?
My wife said the exact same thing to me, that she doesn't reach out to me or hasn't reached out to me because she's afraid that if she's playful with me, that it'll turn sexual when she's in a relationship, turn sexual.
Yeah.
That I think has a lot to do with this idea of attunement, right? So the research shows that men always, consistently overestimate female sexual interest, right? So if you're flirtatious at all, we're like, she wants the D, right? And like 90% of the time, she's just like, no, I just need I need a laugh. Like I need some fun. I need to show that you care for me in some way. Right.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then yes, later. Right. I will.
Right.
But it's so often like, there's for women, the need for trust and emotional connection is foundational to being able to access their libido.
Yeah. I think too, it makes me think of even something as silly, like we go to the Charleston every summer because that's where his family is. And so we go out to the
South Carolina.
Yeah. So we're at the beach and, swimsuits and whatever. And even that, like, I want to play more. I want to play more than I do. But there's a huge, number one, because I didn't grow up at the beach. I grew up in flippin' rainy town, USA, because you're from here. Which I was going to ask you, how do you do all of this jumping about in trees when it's wet 90% of the time? But that's a different conversation. But so like even going to the beach and having this desire to play, like I feel it. Like I want to be on the ground more and rolling around, like the stuff that's in your videos, but I'm hyper aware that someone is going to sexualize that or that I should somehow be like dressed in weird REI clothes so that there's an indicator like I'm not trying to be sexy right now. See my keens, I don't, it's a really challenging place to be. But then I have such a strong desire to play and like climb stuff and do all of that, but none of my peers are doing it, especially no females that I know are doing it. So I would love, I don't know, like how do you get adults to do this stuff? You just like run events and be cool and they come to you?
Get invited on Jordan Peterson.
I know, yeah. How the heck did that happen?
When it comes to so there's a couple of questions in there, but how do we get adults to do this? The big thing is like, find the people who are already almost there. Right. A lot of times the problem is that you want to convert people who are very far from converted. And so you want to look for people who already have you're like opening a small door. You're not asking them to like climb the castle to get into what you're trying to do. So I think that's a big part. And so that's why we've kind of, that was why I created a worldwide brand instead of focusing on local after I left the parkour gym, was because I knew that there were people who were ready, who were on that edge of innovation, but I knew that they weren't going to be very concentrated anywhere regionally. So I had to like sample the whole world. Now we're seeing it more. We have little hubs growing. I just got an email today. One of our students is coming to the spring retreat. I hooked him up with another applicant who didn't end up purchasing this year. He wasn't able to do it, but he's a high level BJJ coach. And I was like, hey, you guys, you're in the same area. Here's some cool trees nearby. Go check them out. And they sent me pictures of them jumping around the trees today.
Oh, that's
Nice.
awesome.
And I was like, this is great. So we're building those hubs. The sexualization thing is it's interesting. For some reason, when you said that, I was thinking about we had some ads for our online courses that were happening, and we have we want to make sure that women are represented, because we get a lot of critique when it's only men, right, in our imagery. So we found a beautiful picture of a girl doing a vault over a tree branch, right? And we didn't even notice that on the other, so she's in the center of the frame. At the bottom of the frame, there's another girl who's just walking back over the tree limb, and she's kind of crouched forward, and she's wearing a bikini bottom because this was the day we were on the creek. And then there's 3 of us guys in the background who are coaches looking at the girl who's doing the vault, and we're wearing shorts. And so all these women comment like, oh, how come the girls have their asses hanging out? You know? And I was like, why are you trying to control their bodies, right? Like, why can't they choose the clothes that they want, that are comfortable in that environment, right? They're getting in and out of water. That's what they're used to wearing. And like, there's nothing sexually provocative. It's not like she's sitting there with her back arched and her butt presented. She's just stepping over a tree branch while wearing a bikini bottom, right? Like, why are you making this something it's not? The funny thing is, like, the men in the group, like, we didn't even notice that the woman was there with her, her butt hanging out. But it's not even, right? She didn't have her butt hanging out. She was wearing a bikini bottom. That's not the same thing.
Right.
But it's a huge problem. And I think that you need really strong leaders who recognize this and who are, basically out there to intentionally create safe spaces for women to be able to engage in play that are not sexualized. Because, my wife was telling me this just recently, that, she was like 13 or 14 years old. She was at a party with friends, and there was a bunch of boys wrestling, and she wanted to wrestle, and she like went to get involved, and like someone told her, like, no, you can't do that. That's not okay. Right. It's not appropriate.
I want to be friends with your wife. I wanted to be on the wrestling team in middle school, and my parents were like, I don't think so.
Really?
Because there were no other girls on it. But I was like, that looks so freaking fun.
They have girls wrestling teams now.
Yeah. Not where I went, but I mean, and I think too, like, even, it isn't to sound silly, but it is hard to find bathing suit bottoms that are shorts. It's not easy. That sounds like a dumb statement that I'm saying to you. But if you go into any, like, just store to find a bathing suit, everything is, and I'm not against any type of bathing suit, but it's hard to find that stuff that isn't, I don't know. There's just so much, there's so much wrapped up in that conversation. But I love what you're saying. And what I hear you saying is that, number one, I need to be friends with your wife. She and I can wrestle. I'm going to win. But the second thing is that, we just need to get up. You haven't met me. I'm just kidding. I would actually really love to know your wife. But, and then just to be out there doing more of this stuff and tempering yourself to it. 'Cause again, I'm so like pain averse to like, oh, I get hurt.
Okay. So
pain averse. Can I say, I just want to say something quickly about the pain aversion thing, because it's huge. So pain is biopsychosocial. It's not a fundamental reality of the world, right? Like, your brain, you can, there's stories about like people like getting a nail through their boot, screaming in pain, freaking out, like they're so badly hurt. They cut the boot off. It's in between their toes. It didn't actually injure them. Right. Right. I have dozens of times, literally, hundreds of times probably, I've come home and Beth's been like, what's that cut from? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. It didn't rise to conscious awareness. So obviously, like, there is damage to the body, and your body will produce pain to tell you to change your behavior so that the damage is going to heal. But how much pain you experience has a lot to do with the social signaling around it and all the other stressors as well in your life. So what we see all the time is small children fall down, and the anxiety of usually their mother spikes, and the mother feeds the anxiety to the child, and then the child's anxiety spikes. So when my kids fall down, and this is something we've really been strategic about since they were little, the first thing I say to them is, you're okay, right? 90% of the time, yeah. And off they go.
Right.
If they're really crying and they're really hurt, they let you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pick them up and you do the nurturing and you touch them and give them love and give them a Band-Aid, right? Whatever is necessary. But the first thing that I'm trying to do is trying to get them to not spike their anxiety more than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see in our culture all the time is the exact opposite. We are feeding fear to children. And then lack of exposure to basic pain stimulation. Are you familiar with the hygiene hypothesis of allergies?
No, I think I know what you're going to say though, but say it.
Yeah. So allergies are going up and up and up in our culture, right? And we don't exactly know why. And the best theory is it's actually because we're too clean, right? We don't get exposure to microbes from the soil. And without that, our immune system can't calibrate itself to what the appropriate response is. So it views very minor things as very major threats. There's good research that's been done on this on peanuts, right? The more we remove peanuts from the public school systems, the more people have peanut allergies.
Right.
But if you just literally do homeopathic graded doses of peanuts, you can get most people to get over peanut allergies.
That's crazy.
So we are literally making ourselves weaker by trying to separate the stressors from ourselves. And I think the same thing is true of pain. Your body, if you lived in a natural situation, you'd be sitting on uncomfortable surfaces all the time. You'd be cold, wet, hot all the time. You'd have scrapes and abrasions all the time and bruises, right? When I go out to train in nature, if I'm like out there regularly for a long time, there's always some part of my skin that's abraded.
Right.
Always small bruises. And my body just doesn't even notice, right? And I think that actually one of the reasons we experience chronic pain in our culture so much is that we don't have, the system is going off the rails because it's not getting any feedback. Doesn't have anything to calibrate on. So when I was coaching parkour in Seattle back in, I think it was in 2012, we had a boy who came in. He had been completely inactive up until 13 years old. He played Mirror's Edge, decided that he wanted to do parkour. This is great. Lots of kids have that story. But he comes in and he's very, very awkward and uncomfortable and not in his body. And he sprains his ankle in one of the classes. It's not a severe ankle sprain. He literally is able to walk, fine the next day. But the pain is so intense and so surprising to him, and he's never experienced anything like it, to the point that he actually goes into shock.
Wow.
And we have to treat him for shock because he rolled his ankle. So he literally, without support, there's a potential that this child could have died from rolling his ankle because he's been so buffered from the normal stressors. And this is one of the big problem of safetyism culture is actually we become very, very fragile when we are treated as to too much safety.
Right.
That is wild.
It's like the Oogway quote, we meet our destiny on the path we took to avoid it.
Right, Master Oogway and Kung Fu Panda. Yeah. Well, what's crazy is that as you were saying that, so I grew up out here, right? In the woods out in the Pacific Northwest. And in the summertime, you always have cuts and stuff because of blackberry bushes and you're picking berries and you're getting apples from tree, whatever. And I didn't think of that as pain until you said that. Like that's the same kind of pain, that I would have if I were to wrestle with Seth. But because I'm not well versed in wrestling with Seth, I'm afraid of it.
Teach you a single leg takedown.
You're too good. You took wrestling. You did wrestling for 4 years. I lose. You gotta let me win a few times. But
I will.
Then this is like a funny, weird side story though. Like this is gonna sound crazy. I cut my hand open, my finger right here, with a chainsaw. I was looking at my bone. Didn't cry. Didn't faint. Yep. Just stood there and went, okay, I know I'm going to be okay. Like whatever. So the fact that even I've lived in the woods, done all these things, cut my hand open with a chainsaw, still think, oh, if I wrestle, right? And how weird is that? Oh my gosh, this is so
Well, I think you
cool.
have to...
Well, that gets to the social aspect, right?
Yeah.
Because it's what's the emotional coding? What does it mean? Like, it's one thing for so the basic kind of signal that your body sends from the motor nerve to the brain is called nociception. So you get some nociceptive signaling when you scratch yourself with a BlackBerry, and your brain gets to decide whether that's relevant or not.
Right.
So like Katie Bowman's another great movement thinker. She's based out in Swim. So I went out and spent some time with her, and her son would run through nettle patches completely, just wearing his underwear.
That's crazy.
And doesn't notice it all. It's completely meaningless to him. His nervous system has decided that little bit of stimulation utterly unimportant, right? So you have nociception, and then you have what your brain decides to do with it. And what your brain decides to do with it has to do with small children, especially, it has to do with what their parents cue them is the appropriate response. But like for you, getting a certain amount of pressure or tension or whatever in from trees, that's normal to you because you grew up with it. But feeling that from your partner can be totally different because of the social context.
God, you're blowing my mind. That is literally the family I grew up in. Is don't do that, you'll hurt her. Don't do that, it's weird. Like, and there's so many factors.
That could be an instant intervention. Like, hey, let's wrestle. This is non-sexual. 0, right? And if it leads there later,
0D.
Right.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I would say like, to start with, be like, this will not lead to sex.
Right.
Like we're gonna wrestle for the next 20 minutes. We have wrestling time, and then we go make dinner. Right. And then if you're excited, if your body feels good and you're connected to me and you want to have sex later, then we'll do that. But we're not going to let those two frames interact for now.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to worry about that, whether that's going to lead there.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about
amazing.
the emotional brain space, kind of like the RAM on a computer that would take up. Like, I don't feel like it. Whatever. No, it's 4:30 and the kids are home. We got to make dinner because people are coming over or something like that. Like, do it smart and intentional. I really like that a lot. I can't remember what I wanted to talk about, but. I do want to talk about, maybe this is it.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
We do want to honor your time. We've been talking for a bit, so let us know if you need to go.
I normally set my my podcast to 90 minutes, so I don't know how long your podcast
awesome. That's perfect.
Okay.
We're here for 90 minutes then.
So I would like to talk about the normalization of, what are you doing?
Tightening your microphone.
Okay. The normalization of outside play, doing dangerous things like as an adult. I don't know how old you are, but I'm 45 and I literally feel like I'm 28, right? Yeah. I love running. I do cold immersion with the rivers and stuff out here. And I think that I like that so much because number one, it feels good physically. Number two, it feels good emotionally for so many ways. Like, I still got it. I can do it. If I set my mind to something, okay, I'm going to run 5 miles and then get in the river when it's January, right? And that's something that I do very, very often. And also the other, like the actually that has a lot of immune system function too, cold immersion and stuff like that. And if anything, we were talking about like, I got scratched by briars, I don't even know it kind of thing. You can make your body not react when you get in freezing water. It is literally mind over matter. You calm your breathing. And then, of course, what does that do? Now I'm more emotionally regulated because I could handle and get a hold of the physical regulation. This is freezing. Everything in my body says, get out quick, breathe until you faint. No, you slow down everything in your body. And then, guess what? Like psychologically, now I can go and have more resilience, or what is it called? I can't think of the other term, but now I'm more ready to take stuff on, right? And I like that idea. And one time I was running and I started chasing a coyote, which was really like, he looked at me, and then I looked at him and I just started running after him and I chased him for like probably
that was over at the
300 yards. Right. Yeah, just across the street. It was in the morning,
I remember that story.
Like after I did that, I felt like a zillion bucks. I was just chasing a coyote down the thing and I wasn't scared. I wasn't anything. I was like, what if I caught him? What would I do? And they're like, I don't know. I'll find out if that happens.
You won't be able to. They can run like 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up with a lot of aggression. You know, I talked about that on the Peterson podcast. Like I had some traumatic stuff that was happening in my childhood. I think I'm naturally pretty far on the male end of the curve of aggression. Uh, and I like through my 20s and really into my early 30s, like there was always part of me that was like, man, I wouldn't mind if a fight was to break out right now.
Mm.
And I was like, well, what would happen? Like, what would I do?
Yeah.
Where is it? Where is it? Right? Like, man, wouldn't it be nice if someone was just an asshole?
I know that feeling so well.
Say, you're
and
talking his language.
Tons of men that I talk to feel that same way. Yeah.
And what I noticed was that when I went in and did a good spar in martial arts, like I didn't need that anymore. Not only that, like also I was just way less emotionally reactive to whatever conflict was around. It was like people were being, you know, bitchy at work. It was like it just didn't have the same impact on me because it was like, you know, like kind of exercise that aspect of myself. All right. It's just, and it's the same thing with cold water. It's the same thing with like fear and parkour. It's like you do this jump and it really scares you. It's like the volume on all the stressors in the rest of your life kind of gets turned down a bit. I think that's one reason why people crave those experiences. And, you know, that's chasing a coyote. That's that connection, right? And it's like you're firing all your predatory nervous system stuff, right? Like, it's you know, it's taking you to a deeper aspect of yourself. But I think I would say, I really think it's important to not think of yourself as the mind controlling the body, right? Like it's not actually what makes you successful when you're in the cold water isn't mind over matter. It's almost the opposite because it's when you can find your breathing and when you can calm and then the mind sort of goes away, right?
Yeah.
It's not like thinking a lot that gives you power of water.
Oh, that's true.
What's really cool is actually that moment when you're just gone.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing some cold exposure in the sound one day, and I like did my meditation before it, and I was in the sound, and it started raining.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just floating in the sound and watching the raindrops hit the water, but watching the way that the water bounced out of the raindrop, and I just completely, it was like one of those oneness experiences. I just disappeared.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was nothing else in my mind except the experience of seeing the water and the rain hitting it.
Yeah.
And, you know, flow state, like when you're doing parkour really well, you're doing martial arts, you get to experience this flow state. And what flow state is associated with neurologically is kind of hypofrontality, right? It's actually the frontal cortex turning off. There's all the motor neurons and everything else that has to control your physical experience in your body actually needs to take so much of the innervation of the brain. But we actually love that experience. We love being able to shut down the talking part of our brain.
Right.
Actually incredibly vital and powerful for us.
It is so, I mean, that's why a lot of people do drugs and drink and do other stuff to shut that piece off. And like that is basically what I'm after. So I hunt deer and elk and stuff, and there have been just out of body, mind blowing experiences that have happened in the woods. You know, I'm alone, and like you get a deer and it's pouring down rain, and you're lugging this, you know, 250-pound animal 3 miles, and you're like, I am living. I'm not thinking about anything else. Your brain is completely shut off, and it's just you and your body, and just it's hard to explain. But like the moment that you had in the sound, it's like we chase that stuff, not as like, oh, if I don't get it, then I'm, you know, whatever. Not become dependent on it, but it is so. It's like a natural state of being. You know, in my opinion. So
flow state experience, right?
A what?
Like
What's that?
It's a flow state experience.
Yeah.
You know, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi did that. A lot of the research on developing the idea of the flow state. His book's called The Science of Optimal Experience. People reportedly say people who have more flow experiences like their life better.
Right.
Well-being is highly associated with flow experiences. You know, people do all like, you know, John Vervaeke points this out all the time. Like, if you describe rock climbing to somebody who's not done it, it kind of sounds like a form of medieval torture.
Right.
Right. But people choose to do it. And the people who choose to do it, they really like it and they want to do more of it. And they want to build their whole life around it, right? Because it allows them access to flow. And it's the same thing with what you're describing with hunting, right? So what you're experiencing is extremely high demands matched with very high competence in a rich environment, right? And everything's highly relevant and functional, right? Like the thing that's in front of you has a clear and obvious relevance.
Right.
Like you have to get over this log because you got 300 pounds of meat on your back and you want to get to the car before it gets dark, right? Like all the time horizons have shrunk.
Oh yeah.
And so everything's deeply meaningful right now.
And you're focused you're focused on one thing, not a billion, right? And that's why like those experiences, I want to go back and back and back because it's basically turning your brain off. And but you're not really, of course. It's not like you're just vegging out and doing nothing.
You're turning most of your brain on. You're just turning you're in some sense, you're turning your mind off.
Right.
That's a good way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
What's weird is that I was thinking this earlier as I was preparing my notes. Like, I feel like what I did growing up was I kind of cheated because there was a morality. Like, I would love your thoughts on this because playing out in the woods or jumping on trees seems silly. Why would you do that when you can learn how to salsa dance or play a classical instrument? And
or
so
you can work and make money and help people.
Right. But like the whole vibe that I did, because it was like the acceptable form of play. I learned how to dance. I tap danced. I did theater. I did musicals, like all of those things. And now remember, I wanted to do wrestling team, but there was like this almost like a morality or like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like this kind of play is silly. Like, for example, I actually love rock climbing. I could rock climb all day, every day, if it didn't rain here every day, which that's an excuse. I know, but you know what I'm saying. But like, I remember feeling like, oh, this type of play is acceptable. And I can create flow state in classical music or opera or tap dance or salsa or whatever, because that's acceptable. I don't know. My brain is just like thinking through these things.
Social prestige matters tremendously. Social proof and social coding, right? So my work is getting picked up more and more by people in the jiu-jitsu community, which is really cool. And I've done lots of jiu-jitsu and I love it. But for whatever reason, early on when I was starting to put out my stuff and I was like saying, hey, you can come pay money to jump around in the trees with me. For some reason, lots of jiu-jitsu guys would come onto my page and shit on what I was doing. Just be like, why would you pay money to go jump around in the trees? And I always kind of wanted to say, like, well, why would you pay money to have someone teach you how to wrestle in your pajamas? Like, you could do that too.
Yeah. With other dudes. Right? Why would you roll around with other dudes?
That's really funny.
But the truth is that these are they're both fundamental forms of play, and that good coaching can develop a stronger play culture, can develop more sophistication, good knowledge, more ability to transfer those skills outside of the local game, all those things. And it, could be salsa dancing, could be any of these things. They all are species of these fundamental aspects of play. But yeah, there are, parkour had to be named because, every kid did it. And then somehow it was just like, it was silly. When we started doing parkour in the early aughts, like there had been freestyle walking. Yeah. Right. Remember freestyle walking?
Yeah.
Freestyle walking.
I was into it.
Skateboarding without a skateboard. Yep. Right. And it was super like that was like low status activity. Right. Really silly. Only like goofy dorks would like actually take that seriously. Yeah. Right. But when parkour comes out, like people are like, this is just freestyle walking again. And we're like, no, guys, it's actually cool. But it was really funny because like a lot of the snowboarders, skiers, skateboarders, they were pretty like down on parkour at first. And like parkour athletes were not highly skilled in the beginning. We were all just like figuring this out. But then what happened is that like once parkour reached a certain level of skill, you see it starting to get picked up and donating to. It's like all of a sudden, like snowboarders vault things and use their hands on stuff. And that wasn't happening before, right? They're doing gainers off of small little ledges. So yeah, there is this really interesting power to social proof, and there is a sex aspect to this, or gender aspect to this. I don't like the term gender, so I say sexed, but sex roles. And I wanted to dig back into that because I think when we're talking about marriage in particular, and men and women negotiating their differences, this is a really, really important conversation, because you talked about like your daughter's experience of being able to wrestle with Seth. Think about how much information about what a man is like she gets out of wrestling, right? Like, I feel like there's so much denial in our culture of the just basic differences between men and women. And a lot of that just has to disappear once you're in a physical engagement.
Right.
The differences are going to become clear. And there's this weird thing that I've noticed, which is women find it really empowering to feel a man's strength and to feel like a man respects them enough to make them compete to the limit of their strength.
Well, what does that add? That, in my opinion, I just thought of this. It adds a piece of safety and security. Like Peterson talks about, be a monster, be the worst. You have all these capabilities, but learn how to harness all of that, right? Now, I am stronger than Melanie, and like after I work out or something, you feel all jacked or whatever, and I'm like, here, feel my bicep, and it's like, it's like rock hard, and Melanie's like, whoa, that's crazy. So if she's like, oh, wait a minute, this sounds totally goofy, but whatever. It's like, oh, this powerful thing won't like harm me, kind of thing. I mean, maybe I'm way off base and we'll get tons of emails about that or something. I don't know. But does that foster a sense of, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I at least feel protected by that.
Yes.
And to a degree.
Yeah, I want
right?
to speak to it because I think it's one of the, I don't know what the word would be, because I want to say the word sexy, but it's not the way that you're going to hear that. It's like safety. It's, what's the word? There is nothing quite like the experience of knowing that a dude could just totally kick your ass.
Right.
But he's being nice to you. And like, even if you're roughhousing, I know you are never going to hurt me, but I know you could. I mean, especially because you're a wrestler. If you get like a wild hair sometimes and you be silly and you like put my arm behind my back and I could not get out of that in 100 years, but I know that you'll never do that to me.
Right.
And you'll never, and that I know you could do that to any of our kids. You could have them pinned to the ground like that. And some people do that kind of stuff,
right?
But not you, but you have the capability to do it. There's something so deeply like that checks all the boxes, like the biological boxes. It's like, let's have another kid.
Yeah, it hits the evolutionary box.
It really is like okay, now I feel my ovaries reacting. Like there's something very, but again, it's not sexy in the like that way, but it's very like reproductive-y.
Yeah, agreed.
It's interesting, obviously we have a big conversation about what sex differences mean, right? Like a lot of people are threatened by the idea of sex differences. And so you'll hear people say a lot, the men and women are mostly the same, right? And the differences are small. And then some people say, oh, they're different. Like Peterson has said, men and women are mostly similar, right? When you look at a psychology. And I'm always like, well, what's the comparison set? Like, what do you mean more similar than dissimilar? Like that doesn't, without a comparison set, that's kind of not a meaningful statement.
Yeah.
So the way that I like to look at it is actually from a biological perspective, right? Are human males and females more dimorphic than other species, right? And so like elephant seals, the males are like 6 or 7 times the size of the females. So yeah, like we're not as dimorphic, right? And the male has a harem of 200 females. We're not like that. All right. In gibbons, the males and females are basically the same size, and they're monogamous. And that's different too. I actually think that human males and females are very profoundly different in a pretty unique way, because they kind of occupy different niches. In most cultures, males hunt large game, and women will hunt small game, but they don't really participate in hunting large game. And so you have essentially a top predator that cohabitates with a omnivorous mesopredator, right?
Yeah.
And males are much more physically dangerous. And that's not like Male wolves are more physically dangerous than female wolves, but not dramatically so.
Mm.
Female lions do the majority of the hunting.
Right.
The male is much better at killing other lions, but a group of female lions can fight off a male pretty well. Right. But human females suffer or have a really interesting challenge, which is they need male investment. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot raise their young successfully in traditional circumstances without males. But males are dangerous.
Mm.
So you want a male who is dangerous to other males and not
Right.
dangerous to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have such a funny example of that. So I do women's group coaching and we run groups. Excuse me. And like one of the things that we recently asked was, what's something about men that you find really attractive? And so I wrote up this whole thing, and it's basically like describing Seth, but it was like also describing Indiana Jones. It's like, so basically the things I find the most attractive in men is they could kill someone if they wanted to protect me. Like that's number one. Like you could hurt someone if you needed to. You don't choose to hurt somebody. And then the other is like, you'll do adventures with me. Like that we'll have, we'll have fun together and we'll play and whatever. But like the primary thing is that if I needed you to beat somebody up or save me from something, that you could do it. There's so much to be said for that. And then again, I want to go back to this idea for women listening to this podcast and hearing you talk about movement and play and rough and tumble play. Like I grew up in a culture. Mom is always telling you, don't do that. You'll get hurt. They are socializing me to the amount of fear that I carry. It's very clear. But if we can stop doing that and allow this, allow rough and tumble play and all of these things and real like movement and mobility and stuff to flourish, how that would help the dynamic of men in a relationship. I don't know. There's so much to say about that.
Yeah. It's like we were talking about like, okay, so for a young girl who gets a chance to play with her dad or other male relatives, her brothers, now she has a really strong sense of she has a different sense of what a male nervous system is actually like, what their emotional systems are like, how to empathize with the man. And then as they enter puberty, because like there's not that much of a difference between boys and girls until puberty, but it obviously gets really awkward at puberty. But if they could sustain that play culture through puberty, then they have a real map of the difference between the male and the female. And so then women can enter into a relationship knowing what men are really like and what they're capable of and how to feel one who's strong and will push you, but is also safe. And on the flip side, as a man, you don't actually recognize how dangerous you are to women necessarily. Right. Like when I first started with my wife, like I had gotten lots of rough and tumble play as a kid, but I had a really difficult relationship with my younger sister, so we didn't play. And then there was only one other girl who lived in our local community. She was a really traumatized girl. She couldn't play. And I didn't go to high school or junior high school, so I really missed all the socialization with girls. So I get into my relationship with my wife, and I've got lots of weird social awkwardnesses. But one thing was I really wanted to play with her and roughhouse with her, but I just wouldn't let her win. Right? Never won.
Yeah.
And she loved it, and then she got so frustrated and mad. Right? So then after one of our babies was born, she was suffering some sexual dysfunction, and she was having a hard time. And at the time I had traveled the world teaching this stuff. And I was coming back to the same cities for the first time for a second round. And I had all of these people come and say, hey, all that rough and tumble stuff we did, that was amazing for my marriage. I'm I had to go to my wife and be like, can we try roughhousing again? All these people are telling me it's great for their marriage. And she's like, no, definitely not. Right. And I had to write her a paper to justify why she should let me try to roughhouse with her again.
I love it.
And then I knew now, I'd read all the research papers on play, and I knew that I had to handicap properly, that I had to sustain her safety and do all these things. And then I was able to create games. I created a lot of games where I just was completely disadvantaged, right? I was trying to achieve something that was totally impossible. And then, and then she loved that, right? It's great. She gets to win.
Yeah. You said something that I want to highlight really quickly. You said that there was a really traumatized girl in your neighborhood. She was traumatized and she couldn't play. Like, tell me more. Just I know that this happens, but I would love to know your thoughts on why why play is so impacted by stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, generally, stressed animals don't play. That's the takeaway, right? And I've experienced it myself recently with some health challenges. But the play drive can be extinguished through stress, and it can be punished, right? This girl, unfortunately, she was her her mother was I think addicted to cocaine and disappeared from her life when she was young, and her father basically forced her at a very, very young age to take over the maternal role in the family for her younger brother. So she was this very tyrannical, pushy person because she was 9 years old and expected to care for her 5-year-old brother because her dad wouldn't do it. And then, there's probably sexual abuse that was happening at the same time. Yeah. So she was a very, very angry person, and she was not somebody who you could play with. And,
yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, yeah, it is. It's terribly sad. And again, going back to like working with clients and seeing these patterns repeat where we see people who are unable to play. And so it almost is like a clue. It's helpful to think of it that way. But
yeah. Well, what would you say? And I know we're wrapping up here, but what would you say would be one intervention, say, a husband and wife listen to this and go, oh, okay, I would like to incorporate non-sexual wrestling and play into our relationship. I have some ideas on it, but how would you initiate that? If a wife hears this and goes, hey, husband, let's wrestle in a non-sexual way, or the husband comes to the wife and says that, how would you say they should initiate that conversation?
Yeah. So I would say that the first thing is that the husband should understand that his wife's safety is the first need that needs to be met in that interaction. So it's very easy for a man to be like, yay, we're getting to play the way that I like to play. And he's ignoring the fact that actually this is something that has to serve a different thing. It's like just because you're getting to play in that game doesn't mean that you're playing like you're playing with your buddies. And so the priority is different. Right. And then, how do you constrain the situation so that you're going to be creating safety? Wow. It's weird because there's two sides to that, right? Like, so often we hear from women that they really don't like feeling like they're getting treated with kid gloves. Like they actually want to feel a man's strength. And they also want to have some kind of win condition that they can achieve.
Right.
So I guess those are the things that you wanted to say. It's like, how do you create that, right? How do you create that situation?
Yeah. Well, and don't you have games on your website? Like, would some of those work? So why don't you tell us all about like your website, and then you can just tell us where people can follow you and all that jazz at the same time.
Yeah. So www.evolvemoveplay.com is where people can find the website. We have a games guide there. We also have a series of free games that you can find on our YouTube channel. If you look up our natural movement tutorials. So there's, basic introduction to roughhousing stuff. And there's even some stuff that I do with my kids. I need to reorg my YouTube channel a little bit because I have a couple of videos that I did with my kids that aren't captured there. But if you look up like top 10 ways to entertain your kids during the pandemic, that's got a lot of the games that me and my kids played. It's really great.
Nice.
And then I'm all, it's just Rafe Kelley on YouTube, Rafe Kelley on Instagram, Rafe Kelley on Facebook, Rafe Kelley on Twitter. I'm on all the socials. We have a newsletter that people can get involved in, and then we have our retreats, which are currently sold out, but people can reach out to me to get on the wait list for next year. And then we have online courses, which are primarily focused on natural parkour. We want to build some roughhousing courses coming up as soon as possible. But then we also have 2-day workshops, which we just brought back the first time since 2019. So after my third child was born, I couldn't do that anymore. Couldn't leave my wife alone for 6 weeks while I went and did these traveling workshops. But now we have staff that have been training with me for 7 years who can do that.
Awesome.
Nice.
And so we have 6 workshops right now available. One on the West Coast, one in Colorado, 2 on the East Coast, and 2 in Europe. So if people are interested, they can check those out. And yeah, I think I mentioned it, but there is a games guide that you can download that's free on our website.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I just
Yeah.
have to say, you're living like the coolest life. You know that,
Thank you.
right?
It's definitely an interesting life for sure.
That's
I'm
awesome.
very happy
Yeah.
with being able to take people out and do these things, you know.
It's amazing.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, and that's weird.
Yeah, I love your work because it we do a little bit of it anyway, and of course now like parkour and all the stuff that you're doing, like it has positive implications for not only yourself but your relationships, and especially your relationships with your kids. So this is good work. It's needed, and it's going, in my mind, back to the basics of movement, of the biopsychosocial spiritual, and how it's all tied together, and just getting out there. I have a one quick story I wanted to say. Like when you were talking about our gut biome and our we're like getting sicker to stuff. Take my kids camping every year. Primitive, there's a spring, so we don't even take water. We just drink out of the earth. It's awesome. And my daughter, she was 10. It was last year. She was like, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to eat a dirt sandwich."
Oh, gosh,
and I'm like,
I forgot about that.
Okay. And most parents, well, oh no, you can't, it's dirty. So she got 2 slices of white bread, put a giant clump of dirt on there, and I just watched her eat it. And it was,
I mean, she took a bite of it.
it was hilarious. She was like, but it's stuff like that, like don't be a helicopter parent where your kid, is doing just normal stuff, but you're freaking out. That's not good. It's not good for your kids. It's not good for you. And it's definitely not good for your relationship. So I love that you're bringing this to the forefront and boldly going to where we need to go, in my opinion. So great job.
I go out and train in nature, right? And I come back and, my hands are just coated in dirt, and I'll just go eat food.
Yeah.
And my wife's like, "Are you going to wash your hands?" I'm like, it's beneficial microbes. It's probably better for the soil in my hands.
Absolutely.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we do when we go camping. It's like, I've killed deer going camping. Like, okay, just rinse your hands and then you eat dinner, and it's, nobody gets sick, nobody nothing. It's the way to go.
Yeah.
So it's
Get
how we're meant to be. Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
So you guys go check out Rafe's work. This has been cool, man. I'd love to go to one of your treats one day, and in Europe, European vacation, then do a sick ass retreat. That'd be awesome. So that's cool, man.
Probably easier to come to the ones that are like an hour and a half north of you.
No, no.
I'd rather go to Europe. What are you talking about?
Come on.
I think we're going to do a tropical one next year. We haven't figured it out yet, but that's like
that would be amazing.
Figuring out how to go somewhere tropical in February.
Yeah.
Do a retreat.
Now you're speaking.
We need that
language.
here in the Northwest. So that's awesome.
That would be amazing.
So thanks, man. It's been a blast. We really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Anatomy of Us. This podcast is produced by my mom, Melanie Studley, and hosted by my dad, Seth Studley. Our show is edited and published by our producer, Reva Hansen, from Creative Media Support. Special thanks to our Patreon members that get an extra episode every week. Thanks for watching. Love you. Bye.